Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're taking a really fascinating look at an absolute cornerstone in the world of wealth building, Napoleon Hill's 1937 classic, Think and Grow Rich. But look, we aren't just going to recap the book for you. Instead, we're completely deconstructing its legacy to figure out exactly how, and honestly, if, it still applies to our hyper-distracted digital-first world of 2026.
Because here's the incredible paradox we're exploring today. What if the origin story of the single most famous success book in history is highly disputed? Or, what if it was entirely fabricated? But, and this is the truly wild part, what if the framework inside it undeniably works anyway? We're going to unpack all this controversy, and then we'll break down the actual underlying psychology of why top entrepreneurs today are still using these exact methods to build real-world wealth. So, to really understand the sheer impact of this book, we have to start with this one foundational concept. Hill wrote, "If you do not see great riches in your imagination, you will never see them in your bank balance." Now, today, that might just sound like a standard motivational poster you'd see scrolling through your feed, right? But back then, it was a massive paradigm shift. It essentially birthed the modern idea that our thoughts directly dictate our reality. It's basically the grandfather of almost every mindset framework you see out there right now. And the reach of this idea, it is staggering. 60 million. That is the estimated number of copies sold worldwide since it was published. And keep in mind, this book dropped right in the middle of the Great Depression. This was a time when people were absolutely desperate for just a glimmer of hope and some way out of crushing poverty. It offered this almost magical promise that wealth starts simply in the mind. But to truly understand the book's legacy, we kind of have to investigate how it supposedly came to be in the first place.
And this is where the origin story splits into two very, very different narratives. On one side, you have the legendary lore that gets passed around by modern motivational speakers, people like Bob Proctor. The story goes that back in 1908, a broke young Napoleon Hill spent 3 days interviewing Andrew Carnegie, who was literally the richest man in the world at the time. Carnegie allegedly gave Hill this secret 60-second test to see if he'd work for free for 20 years. Hill supposedly said yes, and boom, a legend was born. But then there's the reality uncovered by historical investigators. Andrew Carnegie's own biographer, David Nassau, along with deep-dive investigations by outlets like Gizmodo, found absolutely zero evidence that these two men ever even met. In fact, Hill only started making these claims long after Carnegie had already passed away.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what Hill was actually doing in 1908, the very same year he supposedly spent a weekend at Carnegie's 64-row mansion. Historical records paint a much less glamorous picture. Early in the year, he was buying lumber on credit for a new business. By mid-year, he was selling that exact same lumber for cash, way below market value, and skipping town to dodge his suppliers. By December, he had fled to Washington, D.C. and literally adopted his middle name, Napoleon, to completely reinvent himself while leaving this massive trail of debt behind. As for the Carnegie story, that didn't even emerge until the 1920s. So, we're faced with a pretty jarring reality here. The foundational origin story of this massive book appears to be a total myth. But here's where we have to take a step back and separate the messenger from the message. Because think about it, if we throw the whole book out just because of Hill's highly questionable past, we lose out on a system that has demonstrably helped build countless fortunes. Stripped of all the mythical lore, Think and Grow Rich isn't literal magic. It's actually a highly effective, deeply structured behavioral psychology framework for sustained achievement. To see exactly why it works so well, just consider the massive scope of the 13 principles of achievement that Hill outlined. This core framework ranges from highly practical, boots-on-the-ground business advice, things like organized planning, specialized knowledge, and building a mastermind group, all the way to much deeper cognitive concepts like autosuggestion and tapping into the subconscious mind. Whatever his past was, Hill essentially observed the real traits of high achievers and assembled the raw mechanics of success into one single cohesive system. Take the very first principle, for example, desire. The book illustrates this beautifully with the story of Edwin C. Barnes. Now, Barnes didn't just have this vague passing wish to work with the great inventor Thomas Edison. No, he was obsessed. The guy had zero money to his name, and he literally sneaked onto a freight train to travel all the way to New Jersey just to ask Edison for a partnership. He took a low-level floor job, he waited for years, and eventually he absolutely crushed the sales for Edison's new dictating machine, and he earned that partnership. That right there is the fundamental difference between just hoping for wealth and possessing a burning desire that absolutely refuses to quit.
So the crucial point is how you actually channel that burning desire into reality, which brings us perfectly to Hill's highly practical 6-step formula. Notice how specific this is. You don't just sit around and say, hey, I want to be rich. You fix the exact dollar amount. You determine exactly what value you are going to give in return. Because let's face it, every goal has a price. You set a hard deadline, you make a definite plan, and you act immediately, even if it's messy. Finally, you write it all down and you read it twice daily. This is not just wishing upon a star. This is a highly actionable, structured system for completely rewiring your daily focus.
And this 6-step formula leads directly into what is arguably one of the most powerful concepts in the entire text, your definite major purpose. This is the absolute why of your life. It's the singular, crystal-clear goal that frames your entire path forward. Our sources highlight that simply taking the time to define this one thing puts you ahead of 98% of the population who are honestly just drifting through life by default. Once you define this purpose, it literally magnetizes your mind, helping you automatically recognize opportunities that you would have otherwise just walked right past.
To support this in the modern business world, we can look at corporate leaders like Japanese founder Tanaka Takaya, who have expanded on Hill's original ideas. He integrates what he calls the 3 C's of success to align your daily actions with that definite major purpose. First is congruency, basically doing what you say and saying what you do. Then there's clarity, having a crystal clear vision of what you actually desire. And finally, certainty, knowing in your soul that your daily grind actually matters. When you align these 3 traits, you build the resilient character you absolutely need to push through the inevitable obstacles.
Now, obviously, reading a self-help book from 1937 can feel a little archaic sometimes, so we really need to translate some of Hill's more mystical-sounding language into the reality of 2026. Hill loves using terms like autosuggestion and infinite intelligence. Well, today, we actually understand the hard science behind this. Autosuggestion is essentially just neural pathway reinforcement. You're basically training your brain's reticular activating system. That's the network of neurons in your brainstem that acts like a filter, effectively programming your brain to spot resources that match your goals. And infinite intelligence? Well, that can be best understood today as deep intuition. It's the kind of rapid pattern recognition that happens organically when you've developed intense, specialized expertise in your field.
And this brilliantly illustrates how we should look at the book today. When we break it all down for the modern digital entrepreneur, the book falls into 3 distinct buckets. First, the core mechanics of success, things like desire, specialized knowledge, organized planning, building a mastermind network, and persistence. Those are arguably more relevant today than they have ever been. Second, the psychological elements, like the subconscious mind. Well, those just need that modern scientific translation we just talked about. And third, honestly, the famous chapter on sex transmutation is one that pretty much most modern critics agree you can safely skip. It really hasn't aged well, and frankly, it adds very little practical value to your 2026 business plan.
Bringing this all together, the real reason a nearly 90-year-old book is still being passed around in top-tier business circles isn't because it contains literal magic spells. It remains incredibly relevant because it takes the abstract, often messy idea of ambition and it organizes it into a concrete, actionable system. I mean, think about it. In a modern gig economy that is just full of endless distractions, side hustles, and constant noise, having a singular, definite major purpose and a highly structured plan is quite literally your ultimate competitive advantage.
So, we've deconstructed the myth, we've outlined the psychology, and we've modernized the framework for today's world. So the final question is for you. If this 90-year-old system is still responsible for organizing the ambition of today's most successful wealth builders, what is stopping you from writing down your exact desire, setting a date, and executing on it today? The blueprint is right there. The rest of it, well, that's entirely up to you.